On the morning of December 6, 2023, Brian Thompson, the 51-year-old CEO of United Healthcare, stepped out of the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. He was headed to an investor conference, like any other day, but this morning would mark the end of his life. At exactly 6:40 a.m., Thompson was shot in the chest, collapsing onto the cold pavement. The assailant quickly vanished into the crowd, leaving behind confusion and horror. It was a meticulously planned murder, and the killer's identity would shock the world. The NYPD immediately launched an intense investigation. Surveillance footage showed the suspect lurking near the hotel before the shooting. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. An employee noticed a man who resembled the shooting suspect. After alerting authorities, Luigi Mangione, 26, was arrested. At first, he didn't appear to be the killer, but what was found on him sent shockwaves through the investigation. Mangione carried a ghost gun, an untraceable firearm created with a 3D printer, and several fraudulent IDs. He also had a handwritten manifesto detailing his twisted mindset and the motive for the murder. Luigi Mangione was a seemingly intelligent young man. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, he had earned degrees in computer science and engineering. He appeared to have everything going for him. But beneath the surface, Mangione was consumed with anger towards corporate America. His manifesto revealed the horrifying truth. He blamed powerful CEOs and corporations for societal problems. Brian Thompson, as the CEO of United Healthcare, was the embodiment of everything Mangione despised. In his writings, Mangione made clear that he saw Thompson's death as an act of revolution, an extreme form of protest against the corporate machine. Mangione idolized Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber, and his violent anti-industrial beliefs. He believed that society needed to be dismantled, and violence was the only way to achieve that. This mindset turned Mangione into a ticking time bomb. The investigation revealed that Mangione's attack on Thompson had been carefully planned. He had been in New York for several days before the shooting, staying at a hostel on the Upper West Side under a false name, using a forged ID. Surveillance footage from the hostel captured Mangione without his mask, revealing his face to investigators for the first time. On the morning of the murder, Mangione was waiting outside the Hilton, lying in wait like a predator. He shot Thompson with precision, then fled the scene, disappearing into the city. The methodical nature of the crime made it clear this was no random act of violence. It was an assassination driven by ideology. For those who knew Mangione, the news was shocking. A bright young man, once a promising student, had now become a killer. His classmates at the University of Pennsylvania remembered him as intelligent, humble, and kind. But somewhere along the way, he had been consumed by a radical ideology that led him to take a life. Mangione's story is a chilling reminder of the dangers of extremism. His ideology, once a distant belief, grew into a destructive force. He believed that by killing Thompson, he would strike a blow against the corporate world. What he didn't realize was that his actions were not a form of revolution. They were a senseless act of violence, one that claimed an innocent life and destroyed his own future. Luigi Mangione's arrest and the subsequent discovery of his manifesto painted a tragic portrait of a man who let his anger and radicalism consume him. He believed in his cause so strongly that he took the life of a man who was dedicated to improving healthcare for millions. For the family, friends, and colleagues of Brian Thompson, the loss is unimaginable. Thompson was not just a CEO, he was a visionary. His death serves as a reminder of how deep-seated resentment and radical beliefs can spiral into violence. Mangione's tragic actions highlight the dark side of extremism and the devastating consequences it can have on innocent lives. As Mangione faces charges for murder, the question remains, what pushed him to such an extreme? And how many others like Mangione are out there, consumed by their ideologies, waiting for their moment to strike? The murder of Brian Thompson will not be forgotten. It is a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked anger and radical ideologies can be, and how far they can take someone when left unchecked. The arrest of Luigi Mangione marked just the beginning of a terrifying unraveling. While authorities were focused on his capture, they were unaware of the dark layers of resentment, ideologies, and chilling intentions that had driven him to murder Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare. What followed was a deeper investigation that would reveal far more than anyone could have predicted. After Mangione was arrested, investigators found a handwritten manifesto among his belongings. In it, Mangione expressed a deeply troubling view of corporate America. He believed that figures like Brian Thompson were symbols of an unjust system, an elite class that thrived on exploitation while ordinary people suffered. The murder of Thompson was not an act of rage. It was calculated, cold, and ideological. His manifesto revealed his admiration for figures like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose violent acts Mangione seemed to justify. Kaczynski's anti-industrial philosophy had left a lasting impression on Mangione, who considered the Unabomber's attacks as acts of political revolution rather than senseless violence. Mangione saw himself as part of a fight against a system he deemed oppressive. This disturbing worldview was further reinforced by Mangione's actions and writings, which suggested he viewed his murder of Thompson as a form of protest against the corporate world. The deeper authorities dug into Mangione's past, the more they discovered about his radical shift in behavior. Once an intelligent and humble student, Mangione had grown increasingly isolated. Classmates from the University of Pennsylvania, where he graduated with both bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science, described him as a promising young man. However, in the months leading up to the murder, Mangione seemed to disappear from social circles. His family, alarmed by his disappearance, had reached out to his former friends asking if anyone had seen him. This concern turned into horror when the truth came to light. Mangione had become obsessed with his ideology, losing touch with the world that once supported him. The investigation into Mangione's movements before the murder was just as chilling. Surveillance footage showed him entering a New York City hostel, using fake identification to check in under a false name. His actions seemed carefully planned, with Mangione even checking into the hostel twice during the week leading up to the shooting. He stalked his target. On the morning of the murder, Mangione was already waiting outside the Hilton Hotel. He was prepared with a ghost gun, a 3D printed firearm that would leave no trace behind, and shot Thompson in cold blood when the CEO arrived. It was quick, efficient, and completely premeditated. After the killing, Mangione vanished into the city, but investigators weren't far behind. The discovery of Mangione's manifesto and his radical views was just the tip of the iceberg. His actions were the culmination of a deeper, more unsettling path of radicalization. For Mangione, the murder was more than a political statement. It was the execution of a carefully crafted belief system. While Brian Thompson's death was tragic, it serves as a reminder of the potential danger of unchecked ideologies. Mangione's violent act was not a result of madness alone, but of a calculated decision born from hate and extreme beliefs. As Mangione faces justice, the question remains, how many others out there, quietly harboring similar ideologies, are waiting for their moment to act? The murder of Brian Thompson is a tragedy, but it also stands as a stark warning. In a world filled with anger and resentment, we must ask ourselves, what happens when ideologies turn violent? How many more lives will be lost to radical thinking before we recognize the danger? The full story of Brian Thompson's death is far from over, but its message is clear. Extreme ideologies, when left unchecked, can lead to devastating consequences. As the investigation into Luigi Mangione's shocking murder of Brian Thompson continued, chilling new details began to surface. What initially appeared to be a targeted killing, driven by ideology, slowly unraveled into something darker. Authorities and the public were forced to confront an unsettling question. What led a promising young man to turn into a cold-blooded killer? Luigi Mangione's path toward violence was not a sudden eruption. Investigators discovered that his descent into extremism had been a slow, almost imperceptible process. As a teenager, Mangione had been celebrated for his academic excellence. Valedictorian at the prestigious Gilman School in Baltimore, and a standout student at the University of Pennsylvania. He was seen as a rising star in the tech world, a person with boundless potential. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. The bright future once promised to him began to give way to a more troubling worldview. Those who knew him described how Mangione began to withdraw from social circles, becoming more isolated. What began as vague discussions about societal issues slowly morphed into an obsession with radical anti-corporate ideologies. Friends recalled that Mangione's attitude shifted over time, from an ambitious young man full of promise to someone consumed with a sense of injustice. He became fixated on corporate greed, equating it with oppression, and soon he turned to more extreme solutions. When Mangione was arrested, investigators turned their attention to the documents they found in his apartment. Among the chilling revelations was a manifesto of sorts, a handwritten collection of thoughts detailing his motives for the murder of Brian Thompson. It became clear that Mangione saw Thompson as a symbol of corporate corruption, someone he believed represented everything wrong with modern society. The murder of Brian Thompson wasn't just an act of violence, it was an ideological statement. Mangione viewed his victim as a part of a system he saw as oppressive, and his death was part of a misguided crusade to strike back. He believed that eliminating Thompson would make a statement to the world about the injustices perpetuated by corporate America. It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a carefully planned, premeditated act, carried out by a man who thought he was justified in his beliefs. Mangione had seen himself as a revolutionary, someone fighting against a corrupt world. But the coldness of his actions painted a far more chilling picture of who he had become. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the weapon used in the murder, a ghost gun. This 3D printed firearm, designed to be untraceable, was a terrifying reminder of the ease with which someone intent on causing harm could evade detection. The suppressor attached to the weapon further suggested that Mangione had not only planned this attack meticulously, but had also gone to great lengths to cover his tracks. Investigators noted that Mangione's use of a ghost gun was deliberate. It reflected his growing expertise and his attempt to avoid detection at every turn. The weapon may have been a piece of technology, innovative in nature, but its use was anything but innocent. Mangione had turned to the very tools that would enable him to execute his violent plans with precision and anonymity. The gun was a physical manifestation of the rage and resentment he'd been harboring, and it was a reminder that the most dangerous people are often the ones who plan their violence in cold detail, calculating each move. As Mangione awaited trial, the case became a media sensation. News outlets began exploring the depths of his radicalization, and people began asking themselves how someone so intelligent and promising could descend into such horrific acts of violence. Investigators pored over Mangione's social media and personal writings, looking for answers to the key question: what drove him to take such a drastic, irreversible step? Was it an ideology gone too far, or did something deeper in Mangione's psyche push him to violence? Many began to question whether his academic success and seemingly stable life were masking a deeply troubled individual who'd been growing increasingly unhinged. Mangione's case became a tragic example of how even the brightest minds could become prey to dangerous ideologies, consumed by anger and a thirst for revolution. This wasn't just another isolated crime. It was a grim reminder of how extremism could grow in unexpected places. The lines between political movements and violence had blurred, and Mangione's actions were the disturbing result. The murder of Brian Thompson shows the dangers of unchecked radicalization. Luigi Mangione's descent into violence highlights how ignored ideologies can escalate. How many lives must be lost before we act? Radicalization can go unnoticed until it's too late. We must confront these dangers before more lives are lost.